Thank you, Aaron. All right. It's probably best that I come up here so you can not only hear me, but see me. Anybody have like a carbo-loading lunch that plans on nodding off halfway through the talk? I won't take offense, right? No problem. Just limit the snoring to a minimum there. Just so I know who I'm talking to here, I'm usually presenting on the West Coast. So this is my first time to Providence at the summit here. Any other first timers? Just curious? Oh, that's awesome. Welcome. This is great. And just how's the day going so far up until this point? You don't have to vote after that's this hour, but show of hands, how many are having a good time? Oh, even more. That's even more impressive. Okay. I grew up in the Northeast, by the way. I'm not a foreigner. I'm just the prodigal son who hasn't come back yet. But I grew up north of Boston in a little town called Reading. And when I became a strength coach, I thought I was going to be the greatest strength coach from Reading, Massachusetts. And then Mike Boyle moved into my hometown. And I'm not going to let him live that one down. Anyway, he moved out. Somebody got him out of town, and so who knows where it is now. But for those that make up this audience, just physical therapists in the room, considerable amount, chiropractors, mainly personal trainers, great, athletic trainers, how about that? Athletic trainers in the house, a couple of you there too. Okay, it's just great to know who's in the audience and how we can direct the information. And I think if you asked me what my superpower is, it's taking complex information and making it a little bit more digestible so that everyone can understand, especially me. One more show of hands for anybody that sat in on Todd Wright's talk before the lunch break. All right, so you two have foot fetishes. Excellent. We're going to get along great. So, the title of this talk is somewhat misleading. Stability from the ground up makes you think that everything comes from the earth up. But you could talk to Alexander Technique technicians, and they will argue till the cows come home that it's from the top down. What if we just thought of it like a wave that flows back and forth depending on any given situation, okay? We can affect change from the center emanating outward. We can do the same from the top down, and we can do it from the bottom up. You can access movement anywhere in the system. So just take that into consideration. But I was told I have to push this really hard, so we'll see if that works. And it is not, but that's okay. We'll see if we can't get this going here in a second. Up, down? So that's how it's going to be. All right, can you see me all back there? All right. We hobbits, we have the large voices, but low stature. Okay. We are movement professionals. And I don't really like asking people to show of hands, but it seems that this is a trend right now. So how many of us professional movement specialists are currently dealing with some type of or arthroscopic issue, joint issues? Be honest now. Take a look around the room. Keep your hands up. Come on now. How many of you are, we're movement professionals. Isn't that remarkable? So we know a lot about the body, but there's other areas we may not know much about. And I think there's two frontiers that we still need to explore: the brain and the lower extremity. It seems like they've been kind of put off to the side a little bit because they're so damn complex. Like you start getting into motor neurology, and before you know it, you're just swimming with paralysis and analysis, and you don't know which way to go. And often we can think about the foot in the same manner. 26 bones, 33 joints in each foot. We've got 360 joints in the entire body, but 66 of them are found in the feet. I can't name them. Can you? Well, we just focus on the big I won't say the big dumb ones, but the big ones that draw attention: the ankle, the knee, the hip, maybe a little bit of the spine, shoulder, scap, elbow, wrist. But it's interesting is that we have repeatable structures in the body. And at this moment, I want to thank Perform Better and Chris, first of all. I'll thank him again at the end. But the reason why I just brought that up is when I presented last year, Chris said, that was great, that was excellent. You got to get through the slides. You just got to get through the slides. I think I stayed on one slide for like 15 minutes, and then I rifled them through the end. So in that thought, I'm going to get through these slides if it kills me. But there's only like 15 of them. So if I plan it out well, this is going to be fine. So our main focus is on the big buckets, right? Ankle, hip, shoulder. Those are the areas of mobility. Whether you talk to Gray and Mike about the stacking of joint function, mobility, stability, if you're familiar with that, is anybody not familiar with that? I'll just in case. We've got ball and socket joints primarily made for excessive amounts of movement, right? That's where the gigantic amounts of mobility ideally should come from. But every joint has a certain percentage of movement, or else it wouldn't be a joint. That space is meant to be allowing bones to move. So out of all 360 joints, certain ones take on a much bigger role in mobility, while other ones take on more role of like a hinge function or stability. So if you think about it from the ground up, you'll find that we're pretty much stacking in alternating ways. The ankle is ball and socket. It's meant for mobility. The knee is a hinge, stability. The hip, a ball and socket, mobility. The lumbars mainly hinge. They don't really like to twist too much or bend sideways too much, so they're meant for mainly stability. And you can follow it up the chain. And if you're interested in more, you can always Google that or talk to Mike or Gray during the social, and they can tell you more about it. But what about the foot? What is that meant for? It's a gorgeous thing, by the way. It's probably the part of your body you don't appreciate the most. And if I asked you at the social tonight, what is your greatest attribute physically? What do you look at and go, oh, baby? Yeah. It's not going to be the foot. How many people feel like they have ugly feet, right? Oh my gosh, so embarrassing. You cover them up in these luxury earmuffs and you spend so much money on those earmuffs. And you don't know which earmuffs are the right ones. Always get the question, what footwear should I wear? I don't know. Your feet are actually different from one another. They're not truly symmetrical. In fact, one might be taking on the role of pronation, while the other one may be more supination. And then you stick them in two shoes that are identical. I go up to Nike World Headquarters from time to time and have conversations with the R&D team. And that's one of the things we keep bringing up. Something to kind of consider, isn't it? So, I got to be right on top of it. That's right, exactly. Okay, how many years have Homo sapiens been around? I just watched a documentary because I love useless, trivial information, and YouTube for 5 minutes gets my attention, and I found out that it used to be 200,000 years where we branched off and became contralateral bipeds known as Homo sapien. But now they've found some bones somewhere, and they're saying it's more like 300,000 years. I don't know how many generations that makes up, but it's definitely in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. So for tens of thousands of generations, potentially, we have neurologically become hardwired to move as efficiently as possible against the forces of gravity. The brain being the overall governing body for everything we have. There's a few of you with hip replacements. Maybe there's somebody here with a knee replacement. Maybe even has a pacemaker or had a heart transplant or a lung transplant. Can't transplant the brain, right? If we take that brain away, we don't exist anymore. So when we became Homo sapiens, to sound like Sir David Attenborough here, we needed to maintain a priority, a fundamental kind of rule and that is our own survival. So the brain needs to survive in order for us to survive, and that requires two things: fuel and activation. Now, if we move, we activate. And fuel, of course, we take it in, but the brain's very conservative in its ability to do what it needs to do. It needs fuel, and so it's going to try to find the most efficient means possible to go from point A to point B. Does that make sense? You sprain your ankle, you suddenly aren't walking on your hands. You just shift just enough to keep going. You strain your knee on the ski slopes, but it's the beginning of the morning, and you paid for a very expensive lift ticket, and hell, if you're going to get off that mountain, you find a way to get around the pain. That's life. All of our life, we have been finding ways to move. That may be the next best efficient means. So, with our movements, we should be very symmetrical, but nobody is. If we look at the anatomy chart is on everybody's gym wall with the skeleton and the plumb line, that doesn't exist. But that's that Goldilocks place that we want to be in. We don't want to be too far this way or that way, right in the middle. Because we know, for the chiropractor that's in the room, massage therapists that might be lingering here, any osteopaths, they all have the fundamental philosophy that the closer we can centrate the body to a balanced point, the higher level or the more optimal performance and function will be through all the organic systems in the body. So as a side note, that's how I create program design for my clients. I look at their resting posture, their unconscious way in which they're holding themselves against gravity, and then how do they take that posture and move through space. Now you need to know gait mechanics and what every joint should do when they walk, if that's how you're going to do that. And I guess this is the time where I should tell you that this is not my information. This is an accumulation of knowledge that I have found over the course of the last 30 plus years. Gary Gray with the Gray Institute, I've gone through many of his courses and workshops and certifications, as did Todd in the previous talk before lunch. But there's another Gary Ward. And if you're not familiar with Gary Ward, he wrote a book called What the Foot. He was a boot fitter in the Alps early on before he became a trainer. And he realized that putting little inserts in somebody's boots could make them practically have the best day on the slopes or cripple them, depending on how those positions were. And he realized that the connection to the foot through the rest of the body was not as well explored. So he took it upon himself to find out what every joint should do through the entire gait cycle. In the major phases of gait, he determined there were 7. Looking at every joint through all 3 planes of motion. It's a lot of joint motion, but he teaches that, and it's called the flow motion model, and it's a blueprint that I use to determine movement of my clients and the athletes that I train. So, this is gonna really be a plyometric workout, I guess.
You want me to be your droid?
You know, Mark, I would really love that. Thank you.
Okay, so what do I do?
Just the arrow that goes right.
Okay.
Fantastic. Okay, let's talk about the foot. Oh, here. I have 2 left feet. My wife will attest to that. I'm just going to put one on this side of the room and one on this side of the room. We already spoke about 26 bones. There's actually 28 if you count the 2 sesamoid bones that are underneath the ball of the foot by the big toe. I was talking about repeatable structures. Do you guys like geeking out on like anatomy? Because yeah, totally. Okay, here's some stuff to think about. Repeatable structures, cages, bony cages in the body. This has nothing to do with the talk, but I'll get to it. The skull, it's a cage that protects our nervous system. The spine, a caged tunnel that protects our spinal cord. Our rib cage, that protects cardiopulmonary. Our pelvis, an inverted cage that protects our reproductive organs. That's pretty wild. And when we're on all fours, this viscera that's exposed right now was protected also between the ribs and the pelvis. Okay. One long bone, two long bones. One long bone, two long bones. Hinge, hinge. Ball and socket, ball and socket. 28 bones if you include the one sesamoid in the hand. 28 bones if you include the two sesamoids in the feet. The spine itself, 26 if you include the sacrum and coccyx. Small bones that are meant to come apart and create three-dimensional movement and absorption, and then in a heartbeat, lock together to create stiffness and propulsion. Okay, here's the real geeking out here. If I held my foot up like this, you'll see that the smallest bones, the phalanges, the toe bones, are the smallest, while the calcaneus, or the heel bone, is the largest. That's just like my spine. The cervical spine, my atlas axis, are the smallest. Sacrum, the largest. Could there be a relationship? For those that do foot reflexology, you already know there's a relationship between trigger points and nerves. Acupuncturists will say the same thing to different regions of the body. But what if this could relate to C1, C2, C3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then we have T1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and if you look at the metatarsals sideways, they kind of look like ribs. So we might have T8, 9, 10, 11, 12. How many tarsal bones are in the foot? There's 5. How many lumbar do we have? Oh my gosh. And then we look at the sacrum and the coccyx, almost like one is hanging off the other. Coincidence? I don't know of any research that's looked into it, but anecdotally speaking, I have moved a metatarsal to release the thoracic. I have moved the calcaneus to free up the pelvis and the sacrum. It's quite interesting, actually. All right. So, arches. Do we have any architects in the room? God, what I wouldn't give for an architect. Okay, you've got this bone that's called the keystone. It sits at the top of the arch, and the role of that keystone is to create rigidity and support when there's pressure going down on the bridge. So when force is applied down upon the arch, it disperses and creates rigidity. We have 3 arches in the foot. We have the medial arch, the arch that everybody thinks of, the insole. Now, there is a bone there, I think it's in the next slide, that is the keystone. We've got the lateral arch on the outside. It's not as pronounced, it's actually quite smaller of an arch, but it's an arch nonetheless. And there's a bone that makes up the keystone there. And then the roof of your foot is arch-shaped. We call that the transverse arch. And there is a bone right in the middle there that is actually shaped just like a keystone. It's called the second cuneiform, or the middle cuneiform. And what happens when a keystone gets dislodged or gets out of place? Can you get a sense of how that affects the stability and rigidity and positioning of the arch and the foot overall, and how that may compromise how force is applied upon it? So really, the position of the foot, like Goldilocks, should neither be too low or too high, but the arches have a unique place to sit. But where my body rests upon those feet can greatly affect the shape the feet take. And therefore, it'll affect the position of the ankle, the knee, the hip. Heck, every joint in the body is going to change its loading position or its position in space just by a shift off center. Does that make sense? All right, Mark, could you send me to the next slide, please? You just did the high rock, so I know you're fatigued, but it's just a button push, brother. There you go. All right. Okay, there are your keystone bones. The talus bone. The talus, man. Do you know the talus is the only bone that doesn't have any soft tissue connections? Well, that's interesting. There's no muscle attached to the talus bone. It's kind of free floating. It's trapped between the tibia and fibula and sits on the calcaneus, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. We're good, Chris. Mark's going to be my man from here on out. All right. The talus is for the medial arch. The cuboid, it's shaped like a cube. Brilliant anatomist early on, naming bones. Navicular, did you know the navicular is boat-shaped? Navy, navicular, there's some relationship there. But the talus, the cuboid, and the middle cuneiform takes you right back to art history. Cuneiforms were those tablets made of stone that they wrote on. And when you look at those bones, well, son of a gun, it looks like a cuneiform. We're not very original, folks. Sorry. All right. So it would make sense to try to create a good, stable environment if I'm going to lift heavy crap above it. Wouldn't you agree? Okay. How about the next one, Mark? This is where we simplify things. You know how we have the cervical vertebrae, and then we've got the thoracic, and then we got the lumbar. Consider it along the same lines. The toes will be one segment of the foot. You don't have to remember all the bones and all the joints, thank goodness. Then you've got the tarsals and metatarsals. We're going to call that the forefoot. And then the two bones below the bottom blue line, well, that's your talus and your calcaneus. Relationships, joint coupling relationships. If you've not heard of that term, Google it after we're done. It's pretty remarkable. Remember, we have been walking for 300,000 years. Most of that was without shoes on, granted. Maybe 40,000 years ago, we started putting things on our feet. But up until that point, so when my heel strikes the ground, to the very next moment the heel strikes the ground again, we consider that one full gait cycle. Now in that gait cycle, every joint in your body must go through one range of motion, not the entire range. Don't get me wrong, we're not saying you've got to go all the way over here and all the way over there, but you've got to swing across this side and that side, kind of like a kid on a swing set. You don't want to send them flying, but just get them moving a little bit. You're going to get a little bit over to this side, and then you're going to come back and you're going to be over to that side. Now, if we're in the middle, then we'll be able to move equally in each direction. But if I start off center, and now I'm closer to my end over here, but further away from there, I don't have enough opportunity to get to where I need to be over here. So bringing the body into a more balanced and stable environment seems to also make sense for just overall movement and function. Now, that gait cycle in every joint and motion, there's certain bony structures that do the same movement at the same time through the entire gait cycle. So for those of you that sat into Todd's lecture before lunch, he had these 3 toothed wheels, which were like the hips, the thoracic, and the skull. I believe that's what it was. And it showed that we move in opposition. So, if you don't mind, just put your hands out like this and connect your thumbs together. Your thumbs together, can you see the arch you've just created with your thumbs? Just imagine that being, say, the medial arch. Now, in order for that arch to drop, what do your hands have to do? They move toward each other. One's going clockwise, but the other one has to go counterclockwise, right? Now to raise the arch up, they just move in the opposite direction away from each other, but now the one that was going clockwise is going counter and vice versa. So imagine that you have your plantar tissue underneath those thumbs. When the arches drop, there's lengthening of the tissue, and when the arches lift, there's shortening of the tissue. So it's essential that we have oppositional motion in the body. Spinal flexion creates oppositional motion between the rib cage and the pelvis. That's how we walk. Flexion and extension, pelvis, posteriorly tilting, anteriorly tilting. The same thing is happening down at the foot. So if we go and geek out this whole system and watch joint coupling relationships, there's something interesting you're going to find. You're going to find neurologically, mechanically, that when the heel rolls forward, the pelvis tilts forward. Now, in order for me to stay over my feet, I have to adjust my upper body by going in the opposite direction, and my head has to tilt forward to stay locked on the horizon. So the heel, the pelvis, and the skull all move in the same direction in all three planes of motion during the entire gait cycle. Oh, what does that have to do with exercise? Well, if that doesn't happen, the brain's going to find the next most efficient way of getting the job done. And we call that compensation, which creates inflammation, wear and tear, and potentially pain somewhere down the road. If you follow me to the hands-on later this afternoon, we're going to be exploring these joint relationships. And I will show you how that by just positioning the foot in a certain way, it will unlock your cervical spine rotation. It may improve your shoulder flexion. It may open up your hip flexor that's been jammed. If you've got rotational problems with your pelvis, we might be able to give the brain an experience that it hasn't had in a while, just simply by encouraging these relationships through the entire chain. All right, Mark, give me it again, baby. Feed me, Seymour. There we go. Let's talk about the talus. It is a cool bone. It's like a cowboy riding in a saddle. In fact, if you got that bone, you guys haven't passed the bone back. I'm sorry, the front row is not sharing, everybody, but I gave them the foot bone and they haven't passed it back. So you'll just have to bear with me now. The calcaneus, hardest bone in the body, I think, it has this top on top of it. You can't see it from the back there, but it actually is saddle-shaped. It's got this kind of wavy, smooth surface on top. And like a jigsaw piece, the talus has the matching piece, so it fits on top. That ledge, that saddle, is called the sustentaculum. And the sustentaculum is basically, it's a saddle. Wherever the heel goes, the talus is going to move in that wherever it goes. When the heel rolls forward and inward, the cowboy is going to slide inward. Now the cowboy is wearing a hat, a 10-gallon hat in the form of the tibia and the fibula. So wherever the cowboy turns its head, wherever it goes in the saddle, is going to dictate what the knee does. So I get a lot of people coming in to see me. The work that I do is somewhat unique, or it isn't common, I'll say that. And I get a lot of referrals from orthopedic surgeons and some physical therapists, a lot of chiropractors, massage therapists, and potentially some other trainers, working with their clients and patients who have chronic issues. And they have tried numerous disciplines and approaches with some success for some, but not complete. And so what I tend to try and do is hunt down the underlying root cause of why that's happening. And when it comes to the knee, I would say close to 90-something% of the time, the issue is not the knee. The knee is the superhero. The knee is the one that comes to the rescue. You can't do that? Don't worry, I've got it. You can't do that up there? Don't worry, I've got it. It's supposed to be stability and hinge, but if the guy upstairs isn't moving and he's supposed to, or the guy down below isn't moving but supposed to, well, that super knee comes to the rescue and it gets tired. So, if you look down at the ankle and the foot itself, and it's not behaving the way it should, how is it going to dictate movement up above? You get the foot to behave, and we're going to wake up your feet in the hands-on with the help of a very simple machine or tool. It's just an inclined plane. And we're going to wake them up and see if you notice any difference. Some of you may notice tremendous. Others are going to be like, I don't even know why I'm wasting my time. I didn't feel a damn thing. It's all individualized, and it all depends upon the lives you led. So, that talus drives the bus, as we say. It dictates knee motion. And so, not to get too ethereal here, I've been in Santa Cruz way too long, hanging out with stone surfers too much, but where does the knee begin and where does it end? I mean, the anatomy books tell us one thing. They close up onto it and they cut the tib-fib in half, they cut the femur in half in the picture, and that's all you see is that knee. But that bone keeps going up. Could we say that the hip is an upper knee maybe, or the ankle is a lower knee? However you want to phrase it, it's all connected. All right, Mark, let's go to the next one here. All right. Human movement breaks down into two distinct actions: landing on the planet and blasting off the planet. If we want to talk about the most common means of locomotion, aka walking or gait, we'll just boil it down into two distinct movements: pronation, landing and slowing all of this mass from collapsing and crushing into the planet. It's a very active deceleration landing on planet Earth. Certain joints must open up. Tissue must load. In fact, pronation has so much more eccentric loading than supination. In fact, supination is the exact polar opposite action of pronation. So, if that is the most common means of movement, are we training our clients to do those movements? Some ways we are. Like a lunge. A lunge is kind of an exaggeration of a walking step. Calf raise, I guess, could be an exaggeration of supination. But the majority of the exercises we find in our programs are primarily bilateral and very sagittal plane biased. But we are three-dimensional creatures, and gait or pronation and supination are multiplanar. There's a couple joints, like the talocrural joint, that is only meant to move in one plane of motion. The knee doesn't like to move in the frontal plane. Bad things happen typically with that. It can move sideways, but it's through rotation. It's through the transverse plane primarily. But what if we thought of movement and exercise and boiled it down to just how well does somebody pronate? How well does that person supinate? If you understand the mechanics of each of those actions, the way in which you look at somebody is going to change drastically. Because pronation doesn't occur solely at the foot. And just to give you an analogy, to maybe sink in pronation versus supination. I live on the Monterey Bay, Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary, and it is rife with marine life, including the orange stinging nettle jellyfish. Beautiful, beautiful thing you don't want to play with. But the way it swims, it just it opens up, and then it lifts. So that's it. If we look at, I used jumping on a trampoline. You get a kid on a trampoline. When that kid hits the trampoline, everything drops, the springs load, everything is spreading out. And then there's this brief moment, isometric contraction perhaps, from eccentric to isometric, and then the springs start to shorten up, the canvas tightens, and sends the kid flying into the emergency room. So just think of that's what it's like. The foot is meant to spread out, get wider, longer, fatter when we land on the ground like an octopus on a fishing boat. And then in another moment, it's supposed to get narrow and shorter, stiffer and rigid to push off. Has anybody been told they have two different foot sizes, shoe sizes? Could it be that one foot is really the brain's unconscious strategy, needs one foot to be more pronated, while the other one, it needs more supination? So therefore, you've got one foot that is thinner, shorter, narrower, higher, and rigid and stiff, and the other one just walks like it's Donald Duck. Now you could just leave it at that and just say, okay, I've got one foot fatter than the other, longer than the other, or yeah, I'm sure you've been told you got one leg shorter or longer than the other. Maybe there was some congenital defect and bone length discrepancy or growth plate injury that caused that to occur. But for most people, when they have been told that, first of all, they're laying on a table and they're matching their heels up. They're not looking at the pelvic position or the degree of flexion or extension in a knee, or for that matter, where the heel is placed. There's many ways and reasons why we might have that. But underlying that all, again, is the brain. Like there's an unconscious strategy at work for you to succeed in everything you do from one moment to the next. When we look at this, what we're seeing is one foot kind of everting in, right? Somebody's going to say, oh, you've got a pronated foot. We could totally geek out on what pronated or overly everted is and the difference there. But let's just say the foot is dropping down. That's going to encourage ankle dorsiflexion, knee flexion, hip flexion, anterior tilt to the pelvis. It may encourage extension through the lumbars. There could be an entire chain reaction by that heel rolling to the inside. And that could create a whole bunch of issues in the tissues in your clients. Like again, Todd was saying earlier that somebody had some low back issues and he starts manipulating the guy's foot and he said, you know, it's the back, don't you? He's like, yeah, just bear with me. Well, you start mobilizing the foot and you get those proprioceptors and mechanoreceptors to ignite. Because if there's no movement in the joint, how much feedback are you going to get? Many of us have all of us, I don't want to exclude anybody here, we all have areas where we don't have the most ideal movement. How stimulating is that to your brain? How connected is your brain to that area? If you're looking at clients, patients, athletes, or whatever, and you're doing movement assessments, is there a common theme that you're seeing that is inherent within yourself? Or are you not seeing something because you yourself can't experience as a human? If you've got SI areas, SI issues, you might struggle to assess what the SI is doing because you don't have a connection yourself. It happens. All right, next slide, we'll see the opposite happening. Like when the arches drop, there's a certain chain reaction. We go into flexion, flexion, flexion through the lower system. And when we have, yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. Exactly. When the feet are overly inverting at the heel, we're going to have the high rigid arches more often than not. The high rigid arches are going to cause external rotation of the femurs, giving you the really sweet, tight backside, just like, oh, baby, I should have high arches all the time. The pedunkedunk back there is amazing. But what it also does is it might encourage you to overextend the knees. It may encourage you to flex into the spine. It may encourage you to have suboccipital issues because pelvis and the calcaneus and the head are trying to do the same thing. There's all these relationships that should occur. So my point in bringing this up is that, over-eversion or over-inversion, we don't want to live there. It's a nice place to visit, like Providence. But if you've ever been to Santa Cruz, it's like Kansas. There's no place like home. And for home, I've got the mountains, I've got the ocean, and I live right in the middle. That'd be a nice place to move. Not to Santa Cruz. I don't mean, please don't move to Santa Cruz. There's enough people there already. But I mean in your body. Not to be overly this way or that way. Because you don't get the opportunity to experience the other side. You don't have enough time. The average gait cycle when walking is less than 1 second, 0.6 to 0.85 seconds. And you've got to go through, let's just take the spine. In the gait cycle, the spine and the sagittal plane must flex and extend. In the frontal plane, it must translate as well as laterally flex left and right. And in the I meant frontal plane if I said transverse. But in the transverse plane, it must rotate left and right. These movements, these arm swings and leg swings, the pelvis tilting back and forth with the swinging of the legs, the shifting of my body to lift me off one foot so I can swing it forward, all of these mechanics are occurring in 0.6 to 0.85 seconds. So if you are restricted in some areas of your body, I guarantee you, you do not have enough time to access that movement. And everything you do is going to be done with those patterns. So, how are we doing on time? 2:30. And I get to go to 5 o'clock? Is that what it was? 2:30. Okay. We start at 1. Beautiful. I got like half an hour, right? 3 o'clock? So the other bit of stuff that I do in my world is I'm a performance consultant. I put together educational workshops for medical and performance staff on teams, on sports teams. So when it comes to like the athletic trainer, the physical therapist, the strength coach, and so on, we do like an in-service day, especially during their off-season, and we go through closed-chain biomechanics, understanding these joint relationships that we have and how tapping into one area of the body and filtering it down can really improve performance. So I came back here to the Northeast last September. I was invited over to the University of Connecticut, and they had been suffering from a lot of sports injuries on the women's basketball team. In fact, the year before, they made it to the Final Four, and they went against Iowa. I don't know if anybody's a women's college basketball fan here, but Caitlin Clark was at that time. She was going to be graduating and becoming Rookie of the Year that year. But Caitlin and Iowa went against UConn women. And at that time, the roster for UConn was down to 6 players. Everybody else was injured. It was just a perfect storm, unfortunately. They only had one person they could sub in the entire game, and yet they almost won. They were just incredible athletes. They lost by 2 points, and they were out of it. And then Iowa loses in the finals to South Carolina. So that summer, the strength coach, her name's Andrea Hootie, amazing, and she's become a really dear friend over the course of the last year. And I say she's amazing because there's many strength coaches out there that have their way of doing things, and that's how that program's going to work. But she has her players' best intentions in mind and their health, and she's open to suggestions, which blew me away. So she and I did a little session online and put her through the program that I do, like assessing her mechanics, finding what's missing, and then seeing if we can put her in positions to get those movements reestablished, reintegrate in, and then walk around, see what that's like. She had remarkable results of her own physical body, so much so that she said, okay, I've got this player, I want you to see her. And so we set up this session And it happened to be their number one player. And just to cut to the chase, they won the national championship last year. It wasn't due to me by any stretch. Like, I've got a terrific outside shot, but dunking, completely out of my range. Anyway, so her player, Paige Beckers, was just coming back from 2 successive seasons of knee injuries. The first was a lateral meniscus problem, tear, and I think tibial plateau fracture. And recovered from that, went through the rehab, got cleared to play. 2 months into the next season, she tears her left ACL, same knee. She goes through rehab and she returns to play and loses to Iowa at the very end of that season. So fast forward to last summer, and basically we were working, and I noticed that her right ankle was not behaving nicely. It wasn't doing what it should do. It was stuck. It was like hitting a wall. I'm like, okay, Paige, what's going on with that ankle? And she said, oh, well, in high school, I sprained it really bad, like every basketball player. I mean, I don't know a basketball player who hasn't sprained their ankle. It's the most injurious, the biggest insult to the body, I'll say that, is an inversion sprain, a sprained ankle, because it isn't looked at as a big deal by most people. There's some present company excluded here because he knows how bad that is, because it sets up a chain reaction through the body, and it's exactly what happened to her. Who wants to run on a sprained ankle, especially one that got really bad? But she's a champion, so she's going to work through it. So throughout that season, she just ran and ran and ran. And come freshman year at UConn, she had to have some surgery on it, which I was not aware of until I started going, what's going on with that right ankle? And she told me the story. And I'm like, oh, well, that would make complete sense to me why your left knee is giving you a lot of problems. Your unconscious brain, how much does it trust that right ankle right now? It's been traumatized on the court and on a surgical table. And yeah, you've gone through some movement, but I know you just wanted to get back on the court. So you did whatever they were asking, but you know, just like she was back in high school, she even admitted, I didn't really do what I needed to do. I just wanted to get back on the court. So then the next season, the knee blows out because that left leg is going, are you kidding me? You're making me play on this leg. All right, I'll let you know I'm not happy. And at no point in time did they consider the right ankle. So with the help of those little wedges, this is not an infomercial, by the way, you could roll up a sock. You don't even need the wedges, to be honest. They're just tools. It's like having a kettlebell. You could grab the dumbbell, it doesn't really matter. I'm not trying to sell anything here, except for the concept of human movement and our understanding of it, and trying to bring a better awareness to really how we move. So we put a little wedge under her ankle, and the coach was going, we've been working on that ankle. You're not going to get anything to go on that. And meanwhile, I'm back in Santa Cruz. I'm online, by the way. I'm not in person. And she started doing some loading patterns, and we put the wedges in a certain place that would get this chain reaction to occur, and son of a gun, it started loading. Oh, she was suffering from patellar tendinopathy on that right knee while we were meeting. And as soon as we got that right ankle to move, she starts walking around. And she said, I don't feel my knee anymore. I go, oh, that's pretty cool. I said, I bet you do these little things and your vertical is going to improve by about 2 inches. And so after that session, I was invited to campus a couple of weeks later. And here I was going to work with the medical and training staff. I was stoked. I had my presentation already set up. And coach says, no, well, we've got you set up with all the players. So I just did speed dating with every single player on the team practically. Like every 30 minutes, somebody else came in. Okay, stand on this force plate. Let me see where you are. Let me get my hands on your feet. Okay, throw this here and there. And it was an awesome experience, to say the least. But the point in me telling you this is that the problem's not the knee. The knee was the solution. It was a knee solution that became a problem. The problem was somewhere else. So when your clients come in and they're complaining about low back or knee, frozen shoulder, there's a good one. It's probably not the problem. It's probably going on lockdown to prevent something else from occurring. All right, Mark, let's go on. I'm hearing the snores. Injury history. Okay, everyone's got a phone. Let's just say at the end of this, we got to go to Alexandria, Virginia. We're getting on a bus. We put on the nav. We put on that app. That's our nervous system right there. What's it going to do? It's going to figure out all the potential ways of getting to Alexandria, Virginia. But there's only one way that we're going to choose, and it's going to be, of course, the most efficient, shortest amount of time to get there. So then we're driving down 95, and there's an accident up ahead. And it's slowing down traffic. So nav goes, if we just get off the frontage road and bypass this, we can get back on. We're going to lose a couple of minutes, but we're still going to be able to get there in the most efficient means compared to trying to work around this roadblock. And then there's a washed out road, or there's road construction, there's a fender bender, who knows? There's just slow traffic. That's our life. The earliest incidents in your life, your nervous system had to kind of get around it. Okay, anecdotal, another story. I had this guy come up from Fresno, which is several hours south of where I live. He had read some article online about exercise and scoliosis that I had interviewed with and gave some suggestions. And he had been trying everything, including like PVC frames to push him back into place. And he was in his late 30s or something. He had small kids, and his dream was to get down on the floor and play with them. But his back was killing him. In fact, just sitting here, his back would be complaining. So I went through an injury history with him. Have you had any fractures? He said, no, I've never broken a bone. Okay, have you had any accidents, motor vehicle, never been in a car wreck? Have you had any major infections or illness? No, nothing like that. Sports injuries? No, nothing like that. When were you diagnosed with scoliosis? I was in middle school. I think I was 11 or 12 years old. Okay, what happened before that happened? One of my favorite phrases. What happened before that happened? Because the spine does not have its own mind and wants to turn something into a practical joke. It didn't wake up one day and say, let's screw with this guy. I've got this great idea. Let's just do this kind of weird S-bend for no apparent reason. So anyway, I'm like, well, what about surgeries? He said, well, when I was about 2 years old, I did have a hernia repair. Really? Well, that's interesting. So at the time you were learning to walk on 2 feet, you were sliced through tissue, nerve, fascia, muscle in and around your center of motion, where the first muscular contraction has to occur. Now there's 57 muscles that cross the pelvis, 45 transcend down and connect to the legs somehow. The other 12 go up and attach to the spine, the ribs, and heck, the lats, they attach to the arms. You've got all of these like spokes in a wheel, and you've just severed through that, and then they've done they've put something in there, and then they just glued or sutured you back up. Now, I know that the nervous system is always trying to protect me, and when I'm in stress, I go into a fetal-like position. It may not be noticeable by the eye, but it's still going to happen neurologically. What might happen to a 2.5-year-old that gets sliced here in regards to their movement patterns? Might we just try and close that up? Because scars are all about keeping good stuff in and keeping bad stuff out. And those scars don't have a lot of interaction with the nervous system. How many people have scars here that you have numbness around those areas? So your brain doesn't have a connection to that scar. Do you think that's relevant to how you move? In this gentleman's case, it was. he began to shift his pelvis in a certain way when he was just a toddler. And it took about 9 years for that scoliosis to become noticeable. And nothing was done for the original insult because nobody knew about it or considered it. They might have known, but they didn't think of it as a contributing factor. Here's the crazy stuff. He was sitting in my facility. I said, okay, dude, because we call everybody dude in Santa Cruz. Okay, dude, put your hand on the scar. I'm just curious. Just go ahead and stand up. And he sat back down again. And he stood up. He did that like 3 or 4 times. He's like, I don't feel my back. I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. I have no idea what to do with you right now. I actually do. I know that by palpating that scar, we got better function. So we're going to hold your hand on that scar, and we're going to go through some movements that the pelvis should be responsible for. Let's see what tilting is like, anteriorly and posteriorly. Let's see what translating left and right is like. Let's see what hiking up and down on one side to the other, and let's see you rotate. Can we access those movements? He left with the same scoliosis he came in with, by the way, but he left in a completely different feeling and environment. His back, he said, I haven't felt my back feel like this in a long, long time. I don't know the last time my back felt this good. And the interesting thing was, we worked on the integrated system. We didn't work on the place that was the signal, the pain site. We looked at how everything was relating to one another. So that's what this nav is all about, is what happens before this happens. If you are working with clients that have pain that is non-contact related, chances are it's how they organize their movement. Okay, Mark, how about shifting me to another one? We got the social tonight. By the way, that, aside from my talk right now, is probably the greatest part of this whole weekend. All right, wow, there's that. Todd, they're laughing at my jokes as much as they laughed at yours, brother. Yeah, right. The social, I honestly think, is the best part of Perform Better's summits. You've got some of the most amazing minds sitting next to you. They may not be up here, but man, do they have ideas to share. I love the social because if you're at the social tonight and you're standing all by yourself, plan on me coming up to you. I want to learn everything about you. I'm gonna ask you questions after questions. I'm gonna interview you, because that's how this works, is changing ideas, exchanging things, because there's stuff that I would love to learn. And I would welcome you to come up to me and do the same. But at that social, we're gonna have those high bar tables. They come up to about my nose and about everybody else's waist. And there's gonna be one table that wobbles. And then the drinks are just gonna be kind of all over the place, spilling and splashing. What are you gonna do? All the other tables are filled. Well, I'm gonna go over to the bartender, ask for a few napkins. I'm gonna fold up those napkins, and I'm gonna fill the space underneath the table leg that isn't contacting the ground. Solution. So underneath your foot, it's like that tripod in the back of the room there. You have a tripod. Structure is all about triangles. Simplify matter. The Great Pyramids have been around for over 5,000 years. They're not going anywhere. Railroad bridges are made up of triangles. This building is made up of triangles. You can't see it, but there's diagonal beams behind the walls. Structure in our foot is the same. An arch is a triangle with that keystone. In order for those arches and for us to have the proper stability, there are 3 places under the foot that should have proper contact. With the medial arch, the places that come down and touch the ground on the medial arch are the first metatarsal head, right by the big foot, the ball of the foot by the big toe. and the heel. On the outside of the foot, we've got the lateral arch. So you've got the fifth metatarsal head, the little ball of the foot by the little toe, and the heel. And then the transverse arch, those two contact points are the first and fifth metatarsal head. So really, your tripod is the first and fifth met head and the heel. Tell you what, we've been sitting way too long. If you don't mind, would you please go ahead and stand? Now again, I want to remind everybody that we are movement professionals. So we should have a good kinesthetic awareness of our form. So as you stand comfortably with your feet relaxed underneath you in a nice, tall, relaxed posture, check in with your pressure as it relates to your feet. Your body is descending down upon these feet. For instance, if you had two bathroom scales, one under each foot, and you were to glance down at the number, I don't care what the number says, but if you were to glance down, would they be even? Would you have the same number under each scale? Or is it going to be different? So are you loading more on one foot than the other? If you are, your mass is shifting toward that side and changing and affecting the pressure under your feet. Check in with the foot pressure under your right foot first. Let's go to the right foot. Do you feel more pressure toward the heel or the ball of the foot? Do you feel yourself putting more pressure toward the outside edge or the inside edge? Just get a sense of that. Now go to your left foot. Are you experiencing the exact same pressure on the left, or is it different? I love different. I'm looking for what's different, what's missing. Is there more pressure under the heel, or is it in the ball of the foot? Toward the inside sole or the outside sole? How many people feel more pressure toward the balls of the feet? Great. You're very anxious, you're always on your toes, and you're eager people. Very good. How about who feels pressure being drawn back into their heels? You stubborn bastards. You guys should meet the toe people, by the way, at the social. Okay, who feels more pressure on the ball of one foot, but the heel of the other foot? Twist and shout, baby. You guys are torqued. How cool is that? You've just experienced some awareness of your own body. Now, typically, you can have a seat if you'd like to. Not always, but the general indication is if you've got more pressure toward the balls of your feet, you typically have a less anteriorly tilted pelvis, maybe posteriorly tilted pelvis. You might find it very hard to touch your toes because that would require these shortened tissues to actually lengthen for once. If you find yourself in your heels, maybe you've just had a child. Or maybe you're like Sid, who had too many beers at the social, right? Maybe you've got a little bit more excessive anterior tilt, sending your mass back into the balls of your feet. So maybe you've got a hard time with hip flexor issues, or your groin is always giving you trouble, and your quads are screaming. You can start to map this out a little bit. It's kind of cool. So, I got to talk about the foam wedges. Like, what do we do with these foam wedges? And they're not just foot wedges. We'll play around with how you can use them on your hands. Who has a problem with their wrists when doing push-ups? Yeah. You have a hard time properly extending through your wrist. Maybe you have an improper way in which you put pressure down into your hands. It might be nice to fold up a napkin and put under a place where you have space that should have contact. And that will position this ankle, we'll call it a wrist, but this ankle and this knee, because at one point in time, this was an ankle, this was a knee, this was the front hip. Don't get me started on the relationship between those things. That's amazing. Mark, how about switching me again, if you don't mind? I'm going to get through these slides. I'm going to get through these slides. I'm going to get through these slides. Okay. So we can fill in space. That's the number one. Like, there's three ways in which I use the wedges when it comes to creating better kinematic sequencing or better chain reaction, however you want to call it. You want to sound smart. I just figure I just want it to move better. So I fill in the space. If I see that the first met is lifting off the ground, or who does squats and puts some heel lifts underneath, right? And why do you do that? Because you're restricted with your ankles, the heels come off the ground, it throws things off. As soon as you put something underneath your heel, you've got something to contact. You've filled in the space, and boy, doesn't that feel better when you squat. So we can lift off of a whole bunch of places. For those of you that felt like you had more pressure going toward the insole, what's happening to the contact point at the fifth met? Or for those with really high arches where the pressure's going to the outside, where's the contact underneath the first met? Chances are you push down into your big toe to make contact, or maybe it's the second or third met head. Somewhere you need to create a tripod. And if it's not in the ideal place, that tripod is going to be somewhere else. And it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, it's just not as efficient as it can be. And it could potentially lead to things like metatarsalgia in the foot or Morton's neuroma. Anybody have a Morton's neuroma? Chances are your transverse arch is dropping down and you're slamming into that second and third met head, and you're not getting the pressure on the first and the fifth when every time you are doing whatever it is you're doing. So maybe filling in that spot and doing some loading patterns to give the body something to push against may cause some change. So the other thing is, an inclined plane is just a hill. If I put something on top of the hill, it's going to roll down and potentially pick up speed. So I can encourage movement depending upon the direction that I place a wedge or an inclined plane. So if I have somebody who has trouble rotating through that ankle, that subtalar joint, by putting a wedge under there, I'm encouraging movement. And now I can do the loading patterns, and I can do the lunge matrix. I can do a whole bunch of movements and come at it from more than one direction. I can have it so that it's a team approach. Not only the body above, but the actual bone itself can be encouraged to do what it's been reluctant to do. So I can also slow things down by putting the wedge in somewhere where it's moving too quickly. Maybe you've got somebody that really everts too quickly and they collapse to the inside faster than they need to, and they're not loading the proper tissue in the lower extremity or up in the hip. I can actually insert the wedge so it's almost like if you've ever skied in the Northeast on the ice and you're out of control, what do? You go uphill. That's the best way to stop. You don't keep going down the hill. You go uphill and you come to a stop. So I slow things down. So we can encourage movement and tempo just by placement of these inclined planes. And then Mark, one more. The third reason is proprioceptive feedback. If you're not able to access movement, what does it say about the mechanoreceptors in that area? What happens when you injure an area? What happens to those mechanoreceptors? They go on to the mute button. There's not a lot of excitation in an injured area. The swelling goes away. The rehab protocols are established. You reach a modicum of acceptability, and they determine you're ready to be released. They don't have the time to take you all the way to the end of rehab these days. And I think the physical therapists in the room, it's probably one of the banes of their existence, is they are limited in what they can do. So they try and do as best they can, and they're amazing technicians. And yet their hands are tied, whether it's through insurance or through the pressures of other stakeholders in the room. So you get somebody that is good enough, and yet they're not where they need to be in terms of firing up the mechanoreceptors, getting that tissue to truly experience full body pronation and supination. Because before you hit the tennis court, it's important you learn how to walk before you can side shuffle, right? The most common universal means of movement, it's not a bad idea to have that under your belt before you start to go off on other worldly pursuits and athletic endeavors. So those are the three main reasons. Hit it one more time, Mark. But there's other reasons that I'll use the wedge, and that's what I was alluding to earlier, is that you can feed movement up the chain. by understanding how the body moves, you can place wedges underneath the forefoot or the toes or the rear foot being the heel to create a neurological connection of movement up the system. So if you've got restriction in internal hip rotation, there's a place that you can start to feed. There's a place you can put a little device underneath your foot, and then that'll give you access. Now, the beautiful thing about, using these kind of things is you can slide them further and further away until they don't need them anymore. I just use them when needed, and then once they establish the proper pattern, just put them aside. They don't need them anymore. It's not like, okay, somebody's going to ask me about orthotics, right? Is there somebody with their hand up that would be like, at the end of the Q&A, what do I think about orthotics? I'm going to beat you to the punch right there. Research has shown that their muscles atrophy with orthotics. That makes sense. It's basically a cast forcing you into a certain position, and most aren't going to allow freedom of movement, but they're going to encourage you to not do something and encourage you to do something else. Again, just only swinging on this side of the yard and not on that side of the yard, especially the very hard orthotic casts. So if you had a cast on your arm when you were a kid and you broke it, and then after you got it all signed by your friends, the doctor took it off, do you remember what your arm looked like? It was all pale and small. And what's happening to the feet in that situation too? So I'm not a big fan of doing something like that. It would be better to give the foot an opportunity to experience something and then let the nervous system figure out what it wants to do with it, rather than force it into a position that maybe the symptom that you're seeking to go away with the aid of the orthotic maybe disappears, but you actually haven't changed the underlying root cause of why that symptom appeared. In fact, all you've done was kick the can down the road a little bit further, and next thing you know, you're going to have headaches or migraines, or your shoulder's going to lock up, or you're going to have thoracic outlet syndrome. And who knows? It could be anything that it manifests. I'm going to come down and give us a hand here. All right. How am I doing on time? Am I right on? Is it about 3 o'clock? Oh, man, this is great. Okay. I would love for you to join me in the Q&A room right after this if you want to chat. And I also have the hands-on coming up at the end of today where we'll be playing with the wedges. But if you're intrigued by some of this stuff, then at Perform Better's headquarters next month, at the end of September, we're going to be doing an entire day of exploring closed-chain biomechanics. We're going to learn what happens to the entire body when your foot strikes the ground and when you push off planet Earth. And you're going to look at the body in a completely different way. And you're going to see your clients in a completely different way. You're going to wonder why you've been telling them to do squats this way or step-ups this way. You're going to question quite a few things. So you've got the QR code there. If you don't mind throwing that on there, you can check out more information. I do have a table in the hands-on room that I've been sitting at, kind of just chilling and talking with people as they're coming by. I'm happy to sit down. We've got an extra chair there. And then lastly, there we go. There's my thank yous. My contact information. This QR code is for my own. It's actually for my wife's benefit. She's my director of operations, and she would love to have feedback and proof that I'm not running off with the neighbor's daughter, that I'm actually at this conference. So yeah, so any feedback on my presentation, I would love to have. And then lastly, before I open it up for questions, if you like podcasts, every Monday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific, I have the Zealous podcast. And I've had just about every Perform Better presenter on the podcast, and we just talk shop, organic, free-flowing conversation, one thing leads to another. But the majority of the clients, or the majority of guests, that I have are the athletic trainers, physical therapists, strength coaches, rehab specialists, directors of performance in all major leagues. So the NFL, the MLB, NHL, NBA, they come on, we sit down and chat. This week, I'm sorry to say I don't know who I have on this week. I think it was Stacy Harden, who is the Director of Player Health and Performance for the new Women's Soccer League Bay FC team. But I've had a whole bunch of people. I'm in my 19th season with the podcast. There's about 250 episodes, I think. You can go in the archives and check it out. So thanks for listening. Thanks for playing along. I really appreciate you guys.